She was beaten for birthing daughters until the widowed cowboy said, "Then let me raise them proud." Buckskin, Arizona, autumn 1877. The desert town lay under a heavy dusk, air thick with woods and whiskey. Streets were quiet except for wagon wheels rattling and curses spilling from the saloon. Buckskin was a place where law bent to coin, and mercy had long since dried up under the sun. Inside a sagging, clapboard house at the edge of town, Joanna Monroe, 28, lay pale and trembling on a straw mattress. Her hair clung damp to her face. In her arms rested a swaddled infant, fists clenched, mouth crying for life. It was a girl, her third daughter in 5 years. The door slammed open. Hank Monroe, broad-shouldered and drunk, lurched inside. His boots tracked mud, the stench of whiskey clinging to him like a second skin. "What is it?" he barked. "Tell me it is a boy." Joanna's lips quivered. At last, in a whisper, she said, "It is a daughter, Hank. A beautiful." His hand struck before she could finish. The slap snapped her head sideways, another useless mouth. He roared, "3 girls, what good is a wife who cannot give me a son?" From the corner, 2 small figures clung together. The eldest, barely 5, and her sister, 3. Their eyes were wide, too frightened to move. The newborn wailed louder. Hank's fury grew. He kicked over the water pail, shoving Joanna back onto the bed, the child nearly tumbling from her arms. "You curse me, woman," he spat. "Every breath you take shames me. You are nothing but a burden." His fist came down again, blood welled from her lip. Joanna curled around the infant, shielding her, absorbing the blows. Outside, a neighbor paused at the fence. He saw the silhouette of violence through the open window. He heard the cries, the fists, but he only walked faster. In Buckskin, men did not interfere with another man's house. At last, Joanna was thrown into the yard. She landed on her knees, face streaked with blood, arms wrapped around the newborn. Behind her, the older girls crept out, sobbing, their small hands trying to help her rise. That was how Jesse Granger found them. He was driving a wagon of feed sacks, returning to his ranch. A widower, his eyes were dark from grief, but steady, the kind that measured the world before speaking. As his horse slowed near the Monroe fence, he caught sight of the scene. A little girl, barefoot and trembling, stood by the gate. Her cheeks were wet, her dress torn. She clung to the rail, watching her mother collapse. Jesse pulled the reins, halting the wagon. He dismounted without a word. His boots sank into the dust as he crossed the yard. Hank loomed in the doorway, bottle in hand, chest heaving. "Get out of here, Granger," he slurred. "This is my house, my wife." "None of your concern." Jesse did not look at him. He looked at Joanna, her face swollen, arms shaking as she held her child. Her eyes lifted, glassy, hopeless. The children whimpered softly. Jesse stopped a few paces away, his jaw tightened. He had seen cruelty before, but watching it break. A woman who had just given birth twisted something deep inside him. His voice was calm when it came, but it carried across the yard like a bell. "If birthing daughters is a crime in this place, then let me be the one to raise them proud." The words hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. Hank blinked. Stunned, the bottle wavered from the road. A few townsfolk froze where they stood. Silence rippled outward, swallowing whispers and cruel chuckles. No one laughed now. Joanna, bloodied and trembling, clutched her baby tighter. Her eldest slipped her hand into Jesse's as though she had known him forever. And in that moment the night shifted, not with a gunshot, not with violence, but with a promise, a defiance of the cruelty that had ruled too long, and Buckskin held its breath. The night air was sharp with dust and the faint scent of mosquite. Joanna sat on the back of Jesse's wagon, her body aching from the beating. The newborn pressed tight against her chest. Her older girls huddled close, silent but shivering. Every creak of the wheels over the dry ruts made her cease. Not from the jostling, but from the uncertainty of what waited ahead. She did not trust him. She could not. Men had always come with demands, with sneers, with the weight of ownership. Jesse Granger was no different, she told herself. He had simply found a way to make himself look noble before the crowd, but she had seen too much to believe in kindness. The wagon turned off the main road onto a narrow trail. Before long, lantern light glowed from a weathered ranch house nestled against low hills. A barn loomed beside it, the scent of hay and horses drifting through the air. Jesse stopped the wagon and spoke gently. "You can go inside. There is food, clean water. You will be safe here tonight." Joanna hesitated, clutching her daughters tighter. Her lip was swollen, her face raw from Hank's fists. She looked at Jesse with suspicion. "Why?" she asked, her voice. "What do you want from us?" Jesse met her gaze without flinching. "Nothing," he said simply. "You need a place, that is all." He carried the lantern up to the porch, opened the door, and stepped back. "It is your choice, Mrs. Monroe." She waited, her heart pounding until at last the eldest tugged her sleeve. "Mama, please," the little girl whispered. Joanna rose slowly and guided them inside. The cabin smelled of wood, smoke and iron kettles, the kind of scent that clung to honest living. The floorboards were swept, a small fire crackled in the hearth, and a pot set simmering with the faint aroma of beans. Jesse set out blankets by the fire, poured warm water into a basin, and stepped aside. "You can wash here. I will fetch more." Joanna's eyes narrowed, watching his every move. He did not come near her. He did not reach for the baby or for her hand. Instead, he walked to the door, took his coat from the hook, and with a nod said, "I will be in the barn." Her brow furrowed. "The barn? I will not stay in here," he answered. "You and the children will rest easier without me under the same roof." Then he left, closing the door softly behind him. Joanna sank to her knees by the basin, tears stinging her eyes, though she did not know why. Her daughters crowded close, dipping cloths in the water, dabbing at her bruises with tiny hands. That night, after feeding the infant and wrapping the little ones in quilts, Joanna sat upright by the fire, unable to sleep. She could hear faintly through the wall the sounds of Jesse moving in the barn, settling hay, the horse shifting, the quiet strum of guitar played low and steady. The children stirred. The eldest sat up, eyes wide. "Mama, I cannot sleep." Joanna brushed her hair back, unsure how to comfort her. Before she could answer, Jesse's voice drifted through the doorway, soft but steady. He told a story. It was about a star that refused to go out even when storms raged, about a small flame that kept burning, not because it was stronger than the wind, but because it wanted to guide travelers home. The girls listened, their eyes heavy with wonder. Slowly, one by one, they curled against their mother's side and slipped into sleep. Joanna sat rigid, her breath caught. His voice carried no mockery, no command, only warmth. She stared at the fire, her heart unsteady. Could it be true, she thought? Could there be a man who does not want to own or break or belittle? For the first time in years, she wondered if peace was possible. And that thought frightened her more than all the rest. The sun had set, leaving the desert sky streaked with violet and ash. Inside Jesse's cabin, the fire was low, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Joanna sat at the table, mending a torn hem with trembling fingers, while the girls slept in a heap of quilts. The baby's soft breaths filled the silence. Her eyes strayed to the shelf by the hearth. Books, a few, their spines cracked from use, but intact. She stared at them as if they were forbidden fruit. Jesse noticed. "You read." Joanna hesitated, the needle pausing in her hand. "I used to before." She swallowed. "Before I was married." He waited. She surprised herself by continuing. "My father was a blacksmith. I was his only child. My mother taught me letters before she died, and I read whatever scraps I could find, newspapers, sermons, anything. But when I turned 16, my father said he could not keep me. Too much to feed. He thought a husband would be my security." Her eyes clouded. "Hank seemed kind at first. He brought flowers, said he liked a woman with spirit, but once we married, he locked away every book, tore pages when he found them.
said learning made a wife arrogant. He told me my only purpose was to bear him a son. The needle slipped.
Pricking her finger, she winced. Jesse's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He let the silence settle before he spoke. Rebecca, my wife, was the opposite. She wanted me to read more. She laughed at how slow I was with words, but she never shamed me. When our boy was born, she sang to him every night. His voice grew quieter. She bled too much. I buried her under the cottonwoods, raised our son alone until he was 3. Then fever took him. I held him the whole night, prayed till my throat went raw, but no prayer brought him back. Joanna lowered her eyes. I am sorry. Do not be. He answered softly. We all carry ghosts. The fire snapped. Joanna's hands trembled as she tried to focus on her stitching. For the first time, she felt the weight of another person's sorrow press against hers, not as judgment, but as recognition. Later that week, after the children had gone to bed, Joanna stepped outside for air. The night was clear. Stars scattered across the sky. From the barn came the rasp of a file on iron. Curiosity pulled her closer. She peered through the wide doors. Jesse sat on a stool, a horseshoe balanced on his knee, sparks glinting in the lamplight. Beside him, the baby stirred in a basket. To her astonishment, Jesse was humming, low, steady, a lullaby. His hand never faltered on the iron, but his voice wrapped the child in calm. Joanna pressed a hand to her mouth. Her chest tightened until the breath caught. No man she had known sang for a child. No man she had known showed tenderness without expecting something in return. The baby cooed softly, then drifted back to sleep. Jesse laid the finished shoe aside and tucked the quilt higher around the infant, his rough fingers astonishingly gentle. That was when Joanna broke. Tears spilled hot and sudden down her cheeks. She turned away from the doorway, shoulders shaking, careful not to make a sound. It was not pain that made her weep, nor fear, nor even the memory of Hank's fists. It was realization that kindness could exist in a man's hands, in his voice, in the way he looked at a child, not as a burden, but as a wonder. For the first time in years, her sobs were not from despair. They were from the unbearable weight of hope. Dust swirled into a storm as 4 riders thundered down the dirt road. Their horses skidded to a halt at the fence line of Jesse Granger's ranch, hooves kicking up clouds that hung in the evening air. The leader, Hank Monroe, sat high in his saddle, face twisted with rage, a whiskey flask glinting from his coat pocket. Joanna, he bellowed, his voice carrying across the yard like a curse. You treacherous woman, bring those girls out here. I will drag them home myself if I must. They need to learn who their father is. Inside the cabin, Joanna clutched her daughters to her chest. The youngest whimpered, the middle child clung to her skirt, and the eldest pressed her face into her mother's shoulder. Tears spilled down Joanna's cheeks, but her back remained straight. Through the window, she saw Jesse step out of the barn. His stride was steady, deliberate, in his hand. He carried not a rifle, not a revolver, but a blacksmith's hammer, heavy, scarred, honest. He walked to the gate and leaned his arm casually against the top rail, as though the 4 armed men before him were nothing more than cattle. Hank sneered, "Look at you, Jesse Granger, a widower playing savior. Do you truly think you are better than me?" Jesse's face betrayed no anger. His voice was calm like a slow-moving river. "Better? I cannot say, but I do know this. Under my roof, no child will ever be called a burden. Here they are not a mistake. They are people." The words struck harder than fists. Even the horses seemed to shift uneasily. One of Hank's hired guns laughed sharply and spurred his mount forward. "Enough of this talk. Let us take them and be done." His hand went to the butt of his revolver. Jesse moved before the weapon cleared leather. He dropped the hammer at his feet, the iron clanging against rock, and stepped forward once, just once. His eyes locked on the gunman's, cold and unflinching. "Draw if you want," Jesse said, voice low but carrying. But know this, the man who fires first will not walk away. The ground beneath you will be your grave, and your friends will be the ones to cover you with it." The silence that followed was suffocating. The tension snapped tight as wire. The only sound was the stifled sob of a little girl from the cabin window. The gunman froze. His fingers twitched once, then fell away from his weapon. His horse shifted beneath him, nervous. From the road, townsfolk began to gather, curious about the commotion. A handful of men, a couple of women, neighbors who had heard Hank's shouting. None stepped in, but their presence weighed heavy, eyes fixed on Hank, waiting, judging. Hank's bravado faltered. He shifted in his saddle, rage fighting against doubt. For the first time, the power he had wielded so freely seemed to slip from his grasp. "Come on, boys," he muttered, yanking his reins hard. "This is not over." The hired guns hesitated, glancing between Jesse's steady stance and the crowd forming behind them. One by one, they turned their horses. Hank spat into the dirt and rode off in a cloud of dust, his pride more wounded than any flesh. The yard was still. Jesse bent, picked up his hammer, and hung it back on the fence post, as if nothing had happened. He did not look at the retreating riders. He did not need to. From the doorway of the cabin, Joanna stood with her daughters pressed against her. She had seen Hank's cruelty 1,000 times, his fists, his rage, but she had never seen a man stand in the open, unarmed, and protect not with violence, but with conviction. Her tears fell freely now, not from fear, but from the unfamiliar weight of safety. For the first time, she saw the difference between a man who ruled by fear and one who stood by honor. The days stretched into something softer than Joanna had ever known. Morning light filtered through the shutters of Jesse's cabin, and instead of the sting of Hank's voice, she woke to the sound of laughter. Her daughter's laughter. Jesse had promised them a kite. He cut strips of old fabric, shaved smooth branches for the frame, and showed the girls how to bind it all together with twine. Their little hands, clumsy but eager, they followed his instructions as if he were a schoolmaster. When the kite finally lifted into the desert sky, bright cloth fluttering against the blue, the girls screamed with delight. Joanna stood at the fence, hand shading her eyes, watching as Jesse let the eldest hold the line. He jogged beside her, steadying her grip, calling encouragement. The scene was so simple, so ordinary, yet it struck Joanna like a revelation. Her daughters were not burdens here. They were children, free to laugh without fear of being silenced. In the evenings, Jesse cleared a corner of the table. He spread scraps of paper and charcoal sticks, teaching the girls to draw. They scratched out crooked houses, rough horses, and clumsy stars. Jesse praised every line. Then he told them stories, tales of women who had crossed mountains, defended wagon trains, healed the sick, and built towns with their bare hands. His voice was calm, steady, reverent. Joanna listened, stunned. No one had ever spoken of women as anything but wives and mothers meant to serve. Yet here was a man telling her daughters that women had courage, that they shaped the world. One afternoon, while the children napped, Joanna lingered at the shelf of books. She touched the spine of a worn volume she had loved as a girl, a collection of fables. She whispered the title under her breath, barely daring to hope. That night, Jesse placed a fresh notebook in front of her. On the first page, written in his rough hand, was the opening story from that same book. "I remembered you said you liked it," he explained, almost shy. Some of the pages were torn. "I thought maybe this would help." Her throat closed. She traced the letters with her fingers, tears welling. For the first time in years, she read aloud, halting but steady, and he listened as if every word was precious. Then came the night she fell ill. It was nothing severe, a fever from exhaustion, perhaps, but it shook her. She lay on the small bed, shivering,
Unable to keep her eyes open, Jesse appeared at her side with a steaming cup of herbal tea. He set it down, then placed a warm cloth across her forehead. He did not ask permission, he did not question. He simply did what needed to be done without demand, without expectation. Joanna blinked at him through the haze of fever. The lamplight softened the hard planes of his face. His hands, so used to rope and iron, moved with surprising gentleness. Her voice cracked. "Why do you do all this? For me? For them?" Jesse paused, his hand still resting on her brow. His eyes lowered as if the answer cost him something to give. "Because I once hoped someone would do it for my wife," he said quietly, but no one did. And then it was too late. The silence that followed was filled with a crackle of fire, the steady breaths of sleeping children, the creak of the house against the desert wind. Jana's hand trembled on the quilt. Slowly, as if drawn by something beyond her will, she reached out and let her fingers brush his. The touch was brief, tentative, no promises, no declarations. But in that fleeting moment she felt it, the recognition of two souls scarred by loss, yet choosing gentleness where cruelty had once ruled. Her lips parted, but no words came. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to. The quiet touch said everything. "I see you, I understand you, and I will not turn away." The morning broke gray and restless, the kind of light that made every shadow seem longer. Joanna sat alone at the table, the ink on her fingers smudged from the letter she had written in the night. She had folded it neatly, placing it where Jesse could not miss it. Her chest felt hollow, but she told herself it was the only way. Happiness was a thing meant for others, not for her. She packed nothing, only wrapped the shawl tighter around her shoulders. Her daughters stirred in their quilts, but she could not bring herself to wake them. With trembling steps, she opened the door and slipped outside into the pale dawn. When the girls awoke, the absence was immediate. They did not ask for breakfast. They did not run to the barn or chatter as they usually did. Instead, they sat in a silent row on the porch steps, knees drawn to their chests, faces blank with worry. Inside, Jesse found the note. He read it once, then again, his eyes steady, though his jaw clenched tight. He did not curse, did not chase her down the road. He simply folded the letter and placed it in his pocket. Then he went to a small box by his bed and opened it. From within, he took a silver locket. The chain was worn, the clasp loose, but inside lay a strand of hair and a scrap of faded ribbon, what little remained of his wife, Rebecca. He held it a moment, thumb brushing the metal, then carried it to the porch. The youngest girl sat at the edge of the step, her small hands twisting the hem of her dress. Jesse crouched down, his voice low and calm. "Take this to your mama," he said, placing the locket in her palm. "Tell her it belonged to a woman who deserved to live a full life. Tell her she does, too." The child blinked at him, wide-eyed, clutching the locket with all her strength. Not far down the road, Joanna had paused at the bend. Her feet refused to carry her farther, though her heart told her she should go. She turned and saw her daughters on the steps. The youngest was holding something bright against her chest, calling out with a trembling voice, "Mama, do not go. Jesse says, you deserve to live pretty." The words pierced through Joanna's fear, cutting deeper than any of Hank's blows ever had. Her knees weakened. She staggered back toward the porch, tears blurring her vision. The children rushed to her, wrapping their arms around her waist. The locket was pressed into her hand, warm from her daughter's grasp. Joanna crumpled to her knees, clutching them close. She looked up through tears and saw Jesse standing in the doorway, silent. Watching, he had not moved to claim her, had not tried to bind her with promises. He had simply reminded her that she was worthy of staying. And for the first time, Joanna believed it. The courthouse in Buckskin had never seen so many people. Word of Hank Monroe's petition spread fast.
He claimed Jesse Granger had stolen his wife, had harbored her unlawfully, and had undermined the sanctity of marriage. To many it was just another hearing, but to others it felt like a reckoning. The judge, a traveling circuit magistrate, sat at the front in a worn black coat, his gavel resting heavily. Before him, Hank stood smug in the aisle, bruised pride painted as righteous indignation. "Your Honor," Hank declared, his voice sharp with practiced outrage, "that man stole my wife from my home. He turned my children against me. I demand the law return what is mine." The murmurs in the crowd rippled. Jesse rose slowly from his bench. His broad shoulders seemed to carry not only his own grief, but the weight of every eye in the room. "Your Honor," Jesse said, voice steady, "if blame must fall, let it fall on me. I brought Joanna and her girls into my home. I gave them shelter. If you call that theft, then I am guilty." The judge narrowed his gaze, and the woman herself, has she no say? Joanna stood. Her hand shook, but her voice rang clear. "For years I was beaten," she began. "Every child I bore was a disappointment because I gave no son. I was not allowed to read. I was not allowed to speak. I was not seen as a wife or as a mother, only as a tool to carry his hopes. When I fell in the dirt, bleeding, my daughters watched. That is what my marriage was." Gasps moved through the gallery. Joanna lifted her chin, her eyes flashing with a strength long buried. "I was not stolen," she said firmly. "I was saved." For a moment, silence weighed heavy. Then a frail figure rose from the benches. It was Mrs. Agnes Whitfield, the elderly librarian who had lived in Buckskins since before most could remember. She leaned on her cane, her voice thin but unwavering. "Joanna was never Hank's to lose," she said. "She is her own, and this town has watched her change. She has read to our children in the square. She has taught our daughters letters, told them stories of women worth admiring. She is not property, she is an example." One by one, other women stood, a rancher's wife with calloused hands, a lairce still in her apron, a school teacher. Each told how Joanna had shared scraps of knowledge, had whispered encouragement to their daughters, had shown that a girl could be more than a burden. Hank sputtered red-faced, "Lies, all of it, enough." The judge snapped, raising his gavel. He leaned forward, his gaze settling hard on Hank. "The law of this territory does not grant a man ownership over a woman's soul," the judge declared. "A wife is not cattle to be branded or reclaimed. She is a person, and a person may choose where she belongs." He struck the gavel once. The sound cracked like thunder. "This court rules that Joanna Monroe is free to live where she wills. No crime has been committed. The accusation is dismissed." The crowd erupted, not with jeers, but with applause, raw and unrestrained. Women wept. Men bowed their heads. Joanna's daughters clung to her skirts, their eyes wide as if seeing their mother for the first time. Jesse remained still, his hands folded before him, but his eyes met Joanna's across the room. No words passed between them, yet both knew that something had shifted forever. For the first time in Buckskin, the law had spoken not for the husband, but for the woman. And in that moment, Joanna Monroe was no longer a possession. She was free. The old apple tree behind Jesse's ranch had stood for decades, its branches twisted with age, its bark rough as hide. That spring it burst into bloom, pale blossoms scattering like snow whenever the breeze passed. Beneath its shade, benches had been built from rough planks, and a quilt had been spread across the ground. It was no church, but it was sacred in its own way. The town gathered quietly, not all, but enough. The librarian with her cane, the ranchers' wives, a few neighbors who had once only watched. They came carrying baskets of food, jars of wild flowers, and the kind of reverence born from witnessing something long overdue. Joanna stood in a simple white dress,
It was not silk or lace, only muslin, carefully stitched by her own hand. Her daughters had worked for weeks on a veil, piecing scraps of cloth together, embroidering it with clumsy little flowers. They giggled as they fastened it to her hair, proud of the gift they had made. Jesse waited beneath the tree, his hat in hand, his face solemn but alive with quiet light. When Joanna took his hand, she felt not ownership but partnership, fingers strong yet gentle around hers. Her voice trembled as she spoke, not from fear but from truth. "I once believed my only purpose was to bear children," she said softly. "I thought I could not live, only endure, but you showed me something different. You taught me that I can love and that I can be loved in return." The crowd stilled, listening. Jesse's eyes warmed as he leaned close. "And those 3 girls," he whispered, "are the most beautiful proof of life any mother could ever give." Her tears fell freely then, but they were not the tears of shame she had known before. They were the tears of a woman who had finally stepped out of the shadows. At Jesse's nod, the eldest daughter stepped forward, carrying a small wooden box. Inside lay 2 simple rings, plain silver bands, hammered smooth by Jesse's own hands at the forge. The girl slipped them carefully into her mother's hand, then into Jesse's. They exchanged them without flourish, sliding metal onto skin, as though binding something that had already been true. Mrs. Whitfield, the librarian, rose shakily from her bench. In her hands she held a folded slip of paper. Clearing her throat, she read a short verse, her voice trembling but strong. "Not chains but roots, not fear but bloom. Here, beneath the apple tree, a woman finds her room." The words carried through the branches, mingling with the scent of blossoms. When Jesse kissed Joanna, the girls clapped and squealed, their laughter ringing through the orchard. Neighbors smiled, some wiping their eyes. The simple meal that followed, bread, stew, fresh apples, tasted like a feast. As the sun sank, painting the sky with amber light, Joanna looked around her. Once her home had been walls of silence and blows, a place where her daughters shrank into corners. Now they danced barefoot in the grass, chasing petals that fell like blessings. She leaned her head against Jesse's shoulder. "We are a family now," she whispered. He pressed a kiss to her hair. "We always were. We just needed the world to see it." Under the blooming apple tree, the laughter of children rose like a hymn. A house that once held no joy had become a home, a place of learning, of safety, of pride. Joanna Monroe was no longer the woman beaten for birthing daughters. She was a mother cherished because of them, and a bride who had finally chosen her own life. If this story touched your heart, if Joanna's journey from pain to freedom reminded you that love can bloom even in the harshest soil, then do not let it end here. Hit that like button, share it with a friend who still believes in hope, and make sure to subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more tales of courage, redemption, and love that defies the odds. Because out here on the frontier, bullets may break the silence, but it is love that writes the story. We will see you in the next ride, partner.